Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. Thank you to Paul and Leandro. Paul is here with us today for filling in for me when I was off last week. And today we also have someone new, or not new to the team, but new to K6 Office Hours, and that's Thomas Wikman. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself? Who are you and what are you doing here?
I'm here because you invited me, I guess. No,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
I'm Thomas Wikman, and I work at K6 as a front-end developer, and has been doing that for a bit over half a year, 1.5 years, more than that. And I'm enjoying life at K6 in Grafana, so that's what I'm doing. And also, I've been dog fooding, so that's what the big reason why I'm here.
What did you do before you worked at K6?
So I worked for a company called Norm, and they create surveys. So I was working with the survey builder, similar to the test builder, where you would be building a tree structure of questions and answers and stuff like that, so that you could publish a survey and also uh, aggregate the data that you get from the respondents. So that was what I was doing before K6. So pretty similar, but not.
Yeah, so still front-end development then. Had you done load testing before or browser automation testing?
Yeah, we did some. So it was actually was full stack. We didn't have a front and back end. We had this is the task implemented. So we did some load testing, or I did, because our company was acquired by a big German company. So they required us to move all the infrastructure to their secure infrastructure, I guess. And then we had to do some load testing, and we used something called Loadster.
Oh,
Loads.
okay. Yeah. I haven't personally used it, but I've heard of it. So, how different is it from K6?
Yeah, it was super nice for the task that I had. It was basically to make sure that stuff still worked, not to make sure that it can handle lots of load, because we didn't have any data to compare with. It was just that make sure that it doesn't break when we move.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really easy to record the tests. I wouldn't say it's easier than our recorder that we have, but it was super simple to set up and run on a Mac, and you had to buy fuel and burn fuel to run the test. But it was super simple, but maybe too simple at, compared to K6 at least.
Not enough options,
Yeah,
bells
it
and
was.
whistles.
Yeah, I guess I looked at it a while back to just see how it had evolved, and I mean, it looked nice. But when I was using it, it was pretty basic, but it worked.
Hmm.
So I guess, yeah, K6 seems more advanced to me, but I haven't used it lately, so I wouldn't know about Loadster.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting.
So
I need
what,
to check that out.
yeah. So what do you do on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, I mostly work with the cloud app at K6 at least, and a little bit with a hard to K6 converter. And we also, everyone in the team takes part in doing the recruitment interviews, so coding and recruitment interviews, basically that, and being a bit social every now and then in Slack.
Just a bit.
Just a bit.
Did you also work on the Grafana app? No, you've been working on the test builder stuff for a while, right?
Yeah, and also the Grafana, the first Grafana plugin, the data source. So Robin, the CEO, or he wrote it, and he wanted me to take a look at it and perhaps make it more open source-ish. Just because I write more front end than he does, so he wanted me to take a look at that. So I worked with that for a while, and so. But that was before the app that we have now. So it was just a data source, and you built your own dashboards and stuff like that. So I've touched it, but I have also worked a little bit with the new Grafana app. So it's pretty nice. Love it.
So we actually had the other week, not last week, but the week before that, we also were talking about the Grafana app. And that's kind of like the evolution of what you had first started, right?
Yeah, because definitely, it's still a data source, but it's a Go data source rather than like a front-end data source. So has a proper data source written in Go and a proper front-end written in React. So it's super nice.
Okay. So tell us about what made you decide to do these end-to-end tests for your own work. I mean, I always like that. I always love when developers think of it themselves, because in the old way of thinking, it was like, oh, developers just code, testers only test, and never the twain shall meet, you know? So it's so awesome that that was your idea to do some sort of testing. But did you immediately jump to using K6 for it?
So the idea it was not only my idea, must say that as well. So we had some. We wanted to do some work with reliability, because our team, the whole company is growing, but also our team is growing. Especially the cloud app is quite big in its code base, and we rely quite heavy on individuals knowing what to test and what could go wrong and so forth. And as the team is growing, we need to have some automatic measures to make sure that we at least could stop something automated. And when we were doing some reliability elsewhere on the company, we thought we could do that as well. And xk6-browser wasn't like, I didn't have to use that. It was just an option, but we wanted to test that first before we took something else. So I tested xk6-browser, and it was really nice, and also was ours. So I felt I wanted it to work right. But it worked really nice from a developer point of view, especially if you're a front-end developer, because you're basically doing CSS selectors and stuff like that, and talking with the DOM and all the good use that you do every day. So we ended up using it because it actually worked.
Yeah. I mean, how long has xk6-browser even been around as kind of somewhat of a product? You know, I mean, I'm just kind of curious. Has it been like
even
a
been a
year?
year?
Yeah.
Maybe since we announced it, I think we officially announced it in the last observability con, which was late last year, I believe.
Okay.
But you know, it's still in beta, right? And it was
Right.
even in an earlier beta then.
Yeah. So Thomas, did you guys pick it up immediately when it was kind of announced? Were you?
No, we didn't. We were looking forward for the browser plugin, because we've knew about it for more than 1.5 years. So we've all been like looking at the hype slides of how good it's going to be, and it's finally here, right? So we were looking forward to use it or to be a part of it as a company. So we picked it up now because it felt like it could do the stuff that we required it to do when it started to be able to handling basic auth and stuff like that. So then we jumped on it, because then we knew we can use it.
Did you consider using K6 Core as in protocol-based testing for the same use case?
No, not ever. We basically looked at xk6-browser, and probably after that, if it wouldn't have worked out, it would have been something external.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because normally I tend to gravitate towards the protocol-based stuff just because it's more resource efficient. But like what you said earlier, that as a front-end developer, it made sense for you to also use a front-end testing tool because you're already familiar with all of the elements that you're going to need to select. That makes a lot of sense, actually. There's a comment here from Fernando Kobayashi. He says, I believe QA should be blamed by this split. Some of us are very scared of devs stealing our automation tasks. There's an element of truth to that. I mean, I think it's both ways, right? When there's a silo, you have to blame both parts. But luckily, I think we're moving beyond that for the most part. But Thomas, how did you carry out the testing? So you decided on xk6-browser.
Yeah.
How did you identify what you even need to test?
So for this small project, it was the basics, right? You should be able to log into the application and so forth. That basically, if you can do that, we can continue going on to the individual parts of the cloud app. So the basically was to be able to log into the app and look at the login page and stuff like that. So nothing fancy, because we have examples of working with the test builder made by the xk6-browser developers. So we knew that was possible. It was more about how is the experience and stuff like that. Therefore, we did some tests on the login page, the lost password page, and actually being able to log in. So that's what we did. I have some scripts if you wanna look at it.
Yes, sure.
Absolutely.
Let's go for it. I'll add it now.
Yeah. So it's nothing super fancy. It's pretty basic. But so what we wanted to do is to log in, go to the login page, and also check the lost password page, go back, and also log into the app. So what I did some helpers, because when I sat down and looked at the actual page, it felt like I want that element, and that element. So I did some like a selector map where I could get all the elements that I wanted to look at for that page at that time. And I just wrote, it's just simple JavaScript. It's nothing super fancy, but it made everything much easier for me to think about the page I wanted to test. Then I had to figure out a way to actually make sure that we could wait for some elements. So I had to add this little exclamation mark that tells the selector to wait for that element to appear in the DOM. So I get all these elements, like the form is what I want to wait for. I don't care so much about the form after that. But I want the email input, the password input, the lost password link, the submit button for obvious reason, and the link to the SAML SSO, just to have something else than just the form. And then I take a snapshot, because we can do that, and it's nice because then you actually get screens that you can look at if something fails or if you want to compare it.
Hey, could you also show us how you, like this actual page, and how you got the selectors for those things?
Yeah, I could. I need to open a fancy new window.
I also wanted to say about the authentication. I see you're using SAML SSO. Oh wait, are you actually using it or just doing? Oh, you're just checking for that element.
Yeah, I'm just making sure that it's there.
Yeah, so I think authentication is one of the cases where protocol-based load testing is a little bit more complex, because authentication, for security reasons, it usually is more technically complex. But the cool thing is that for front-end testing tools like xk6-browser, it isn't. It's just another field.
Yeah, definitely. So this is the login page. So this is the form, and so for good reasons, because we're using. I don't know if this. Can we change the size of this? Yes, we could. We're using style components for when we build the components, and they get super fancy names until they get a hashed name like this one. So you can't go too aggressive on the exact selector for this. I couldn't use this, for example, because if we update style components, then the test would break because of that. So you want to find the stuff that you're looking for and trying to be as you don't want to find something else accidentally. So that's why we started adding IDs to the form to look for the form, because we didn't use IDs or names for the form. We'd use it internally in the app, but we didn't use it in DOM. So to make it more reliable, we started using IDs for the form. So we could actually look for that specific form, just not some random form and some random input. Because the email input here, it has the same ID as the email input on the lost password page. So,
So that's so cool. So it was only in testing that you realized that that would be necessary, or that that would have been a problem if you hadn't changed it.
yeah, it could have been a problem. It was such an easy change as well, because all the information is there in the code. All I had to do was add it as an attribute. So it felt like, let's add it now rather than later, because it could be an issue. And also I could focus on just looking at that specific form rather than looking for elements randomly on the page. It just felt safer for the future for some reason. And we're definitely going to need to add more identification, like data sets or stuff like that. That's more unique than just the classes, because the classes are, as you see, there can be, you're just changing the name of this component without changing it, what it actually renders for the user would invalidate the test. So trying to write the code for the test is pretty good. It's easier to have reliable tests. That's at least my take on it.
So this is a really handy tip if anybody who's listening isn't sure how to get to this part. Thomas is just using DevTools and the inspect element feature of it, and it's available on many browsers, but he's using Chrome, I believe, now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when you're writing, that's another difference from a front end testing tool versus a protocol based or a back end testing tool, is that you do need to actually go to the application and look at the names, how you're going to identify the elements that your script is going to interact with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Fernando pointed out there as well about the beauty of the devs writing the test, because that way then you were able to just go in there and then add those identifiers to your scripts, so that that all work together. But yeah, I know I've past life, when there was the separate QA and separate development, the QA testers, they needed these sort of identifiers and everything, and then the devs were, I guess, maybe slow to react. Just wasn't on their priority list.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess until you're testing, it's hard to understand why you need these unique IDs for elements. I mean, the average user isn't going to care. So it's really only in the testing that you realize, like, oh, if I don't make it unique, it is way harder to find that element.
Yeah, definitely. But it's also the same if you write TDD, if you've done some stuff like that. It's you're writing code to test the code, basically. And then the code usually becomes better as well than to add tests after the fact that you have something working, right? So yeah, it's a bit cheating, I guess, that the developers can do whatever they want to make their test easy to write. It's the same thing to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a good thing that you can do that.
Yeah, so do I.
But yeah, you always do run into that risk, like with the unit tests and that people say, oh yeah, I have 100% coverage, but it's like, but you can write bad tests just to get the coverage that you want. So
yeah, true. It's
Yeah.
more important that you have someone reviewing the test to make sure that it tests stuff for you. And then you can rely on the coverage, I guess.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So when you wrote the test script, did you immediately start writing the helper functions, or did you just realize that you needed that after you started?
That was something I did when I had familiarized myself with the application, the browser plugin. So I didn't feel like I needed it at the time. I would probably not need it now, either way. It just made it simpler for me to think about that specific page and getting all the elements that I wanted at that point. Might not be using it for anything in the future. Don't know. Currently, it's kind of neat. It's handy. Just grabs all the stuff you want, and then you use them for checks and stuff like that. So
It might also be worth mentioning that Thomas isn't on the team that's working on xk6-browser. So that's why it's actually even more valuable, because we're dogfooding two products at the same time, K6 Cloud and xk6-browser.
Yeah, I'm not on the xk6-browser team. But yeah, so I don't know, maybe we'll stop using the selector map. It's not super necessary, but was nice. It's also nice to write code, right? So
Spoken like a true developer.
yeah. But yeah, so all the elements are here, and these have IDs, and the form has an ID now, and we can wait for it. And there we have the SAML SSO link. So just pick some stuff that would be neat to have a test that would check that they are actually there, just for this purpose of testing xk6-browser. And then I created some const for some stuff that I wanted to check against what I expect them to be. I wrote them here so that this is just the test executing, and this is where you sort of set up the test, I guess. And then I use xk6, not xk6, but k6 check, because it looks so fancy in the console, like a tester would see their test usually, unit test. So I used that, and actually this didn't work as expected. But I got some insider tips on how to work around it, and they will also make sure that it works for the future. So I guess that's the good part with dog fooding. People will ask you, why is this not working?
You have the direct connection.
Yeah.
Why isn't it? Could you have maybe checked the HTTP code, like maybe expecting a 301 or whatever it is?
No, I'm not expecting what that it redirects by itself is not super important. It's more important what it redirects to. In this case. So yeah, other than I could have used the status or versus 304, 302 or something like that. But no, I just wanted to make sure that the URL was actually this, because this is actually a route so it's basically has some business logic tied to it. So I wanted it to be this exact route.
So I guess what you ended up doing instead was checking for elements on that page?
I skipped it since there was a workaround for it. So this is the workaround actually. So I haven't implemented it, but I just returned false for it for now to not so it's basically like a skipped test, I would say. But not if I just remove it from the check, it might never add it, right? Because it's not failing anymore. So then you don't have to fix it. So I just have it returning false now. I'd rather use this than to have this, but I will add this if we don't resolve this. So, but I still want it, so I'm not just going to have it return false until it's actually returning true, right? Yeah, so the checks are normal K6 checks. I pass in my little map of elements that I return from my selector map. So these are the payload for check is actually a map of elements with the name added here. So then I look for the text. So this is pretty basic JavaScript that you can use when you have the element. So it's super easy to just compare it, just like you would do if you're just writing the code in the console or as a script, right? Nothing super fancy, but just to make sure that it works and that you get the output that you expect. And we could actually run it, but then I do the same again for the lost password page, because currently we are on the login page. And one of the elements was the lost password link. So we click that one and make sure that we get all the elements again that I want to get from the page. And create some const for the text I want to compare with. I wanted to say sign in here. I guess it's not super important that it says sign in here, but just for the test's sake. And then I wanted to test out the component that has email validation built in. So if you write in an email that's invalid, it's just gonna, you cannot send the password. You cannot send an email, right? Because it actually has a password validation. It has an email validation. So I wanted to test for that because it's, if that breaks, it's good to know, because then someone has changed something that they shouldn't have. So I did that and looked. Also, when I was on this page, I found something that I found was a bit strange. So I guess it was good that I did this testing. I felt a bit weird that it says already have an account on the lost password page. And it's probably something that we want to change. I guess that's my feeling at least. So that was perhaps something useful that came out of this testing. Yeah, and I checked the test. I mean, just compare the elements and make sure that it's enabled when it should be enabled or not, and that this sign in here button works as it should. And then and also I take some snapshots every now and then, just for, because it's nice. Because I have a plan of comparing snapshots, but that's for the future. Then we actually log in. I don't know if I shouldn't have a password in here. Then we log into the to the actual app. Yeah, I fixed it. Then we log into the actual app and make sure that that works, because that's a pretty neat feature of the app to be able to log in. And same again, I just use my little selector map to grab all the elements I want to toss around with when I'm doing the checks. And I guess this is not pure JavaScript DOM manipulation, but it's pretty easy to pick up the built-in functions for actually emulating typing in the input, rather than just set the value with code, because you want to emulate user interaction as much as possible. So this is typing the actual username, and this is typing the actual password that you're not allowed to see. And it clicks. And then we should hopefully log into that. And here does the fun part start, when you have an application that loads stuff, like a SPA application that loads stuff and animates stuff. It makes it really tricky to just wait for one particular element and then continue doing your testing. Because I'm doing some extra snapshots here just to prove the point of, you actually have to use some sleeps and stuff like that, or for this specific login page, because it loads with animations. And it's super nice to look at, but it's not so nice to test, I would say. But yeah, so it's nothing big. It's just us testing xk6-browser and starting to add more and more end-to-end tests to the app. The next step is to add end-to-end test for the to come test builder, which has some secret features.
Secret features?
Yeah. Else I would have done some testing with the test builder, because I'm doing that when I'm not doing when I wasn't working with this test, I was working with the new features of the test builder. So it felt pointless to create tests for the test builder right now when so much would change. So that's why we stopped at this easy part. Yeah, I could run the test. You can see it. Obviously, I won't run it.
That'd be great.
In a headless mode, because that would be pretty sad to watch.
Yeah, and I was going to ask too on your so your workflow. I mean, do you find yourself running the scripts locally as you make changes? Is it, obviously it's probably in the headless mode in CI/CD pipeline. So if you create a pull request, it automatically runs. But do you find yourself running this a lot?
Not at this point, because we're testing it out. The idea and the plan that what we want to do with it is not necessarily to have it running on a pull request, but rather on the release pipeline. So before we do a release, we want to check out the new code base against production and see that it all fits together. Not only
Gotcha.
for the release, but also run it on the schedule, like nightly or even more often than that. It wouldn't only spot like front-end mistakes, to say. It would also let us catch some, if the backend goes down for some reason.
Right.
We would notice that as well, or return some funky results. It all depends on the test. But the idea is not to have it running on every pull request, no. But yeah, I made some scripts for us on the front end too, because currently you have to run do a local install of the xk6-browser plugin, and so I made a couple of scripts. It's super basic, and it's also, this is basically what you will find if you went to the documentation page of xk6-browser. So it's just ripped straight out of there, but put down into a script so that you could just run the script and have it installed, rather than to commit the binary and having to remember to update the binary. I guess you would have to remember to update the binary either way, but we don't want to commit the binary at this point. So if I just check this out, I would like to install it, and super basic. And I guess it's good by the K6 team and the xk6-browser people, because it's just super easy. And now I would want to run it. Could run it to the cloud, but I'm not gonna, because of reasons I will tell you. So now magic is happening. So now it does all the stuff that I asked it to do with the code, right? So we'll input invalid email, a valid email, click the link, go back, log in, and ta-da! And all the trash you see in the background is actually, I'm running it towards a dev environment, so you will see lots of stuff like that. And here you get, these are the K6 checks. So it basically looked like a unit test somewhat. And here we have the failing one that I failed on purpose, so that we can fix it. And here we have the non-failing test, so it's super nice. And the stuff that I'm looking more forward a lot to use is all the nice snapshots that it takes during the time. But yeah, here can have an example of this. Now I'm logged into the app, but now the app starts working with all the good use behind. And this is not so nice, because now it's animating in stuff, but it's technically the app is ready, but for a user it's not ready. So continue testing here would be not user-ish interactions. So you have to be aware of waiting for the actual app to be in a state that a user would interact with it. I think it's important, at least. So you have to be aware of where you are. That's why I think the snapshots or the screenshots are really a handful, because you could actually take just a snapshot to see what's the state right now before I test the next step. So yeah, I'm using those a lot. Also nice. Yeah, but that's basically it. Yeah, I had some issues when I tested it, but maybe that's for later. I don't know. Would you want me to talk about them now?
Well, we can talk about that already, although we do have a question, and I don't know, I don't have the answer to this, but this is our friend Naveen Kumar, or QA Insights, who says, how to add MTLS certificate from the script. Sorry if this is already discussed or answered.
Oh, I wouldn't know.
I don't actually know. About you, Paul?
Security is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's even necessary, because we don't really have to care about the protocols. Like, the script is actually like a real user, so it's more about just clicking on the right things.
Yeah, you're definitely trying to imitate the user as much as possible.
Yeah. So I think that might be something that you might have to worry about if you were doing it on the protocol level, but on the browser level, I don't know if it's necessary, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
maybe we'll have to get one of the people from xk6-browser, the people working on it, to answer that and say if it's on the roadmap if we don't already do it.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're maybe using, I don't know, self-signed certs or something like that on the server side, you know, there might be issues there, but yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah. A similar thing is it can be a bit temptful to interact directly with the store, the React store. I would try to avoid that as much as possible because the user would never do that. Or I guess most users wouldn't do that. So I would try to keep it as interactions. Actually, rather move the mouse to a specific position than to hijack the store and inject it with props that would make you go to this place you want to go. That's my take, at least.
Yeah, I'm also going to put in, I saw this GitHub issue actually about Puppeteer, which is not the same, right? But we do use a lot of the same APIs, so I'm hoping that maybe it'll help Naveen Kumar. I'm just posting it into the chat. So let's talk about the issues that you did find.
Yeah, mainly was a lack of documentation. And I'm a bit spoiled because K6 usually has really good documentation with good examples. So I mean, yeah, I was I'm a bit spoiled, but obviously I could talk to the guys developing it directly. So, but I tried to stay away from that because I looked at the docs and the docs had some playwright references, right? But the big difference there was that they are asynchronous and we are synchronous at this point. And I found some example scripts that we had for similar stuff that they had, but they were translated to being synchronous in a way that I probably wouldn't be so familiar with as a developer when you have one option that is synchronous and one is asynchronous. So I felt that that was a bit wonky. Could have been as a developer, at least as a front end developer. So this is the way for the wait for navigation, for example. This is the way the playwright does it. It has promise all. So and you start with the wait for navigation, and everything else is whatever you want to do. And this was the way I found it to be implemented in xk6-browser. It felt a bit unsafe for reasons. It felt like you couldn't. So you do stuff before and then after that you would wait for navigation. It didn't feel contained and didn't feel like you could actually look at the code and understand what's going on because that's just how I took it. So for me, if it would have been a library that has shifted towards asynchronous, like promise-based, from non-promise-based, I would expected it to work something like this. You have a wait for navigation that takes a callback, and then it just encapsulates whatever you do inside that callback with the waiting for navigation, and then it continues. Or something like that. Something like on this line, you have some like an option. You do something and then you wait for navigation. So that was something that I felt was a bit wonky in its implementation. But I guess nothing is set in stone either. So I talked to them and they felt I should raise an issue and we could discuss it. And I think it's a really good approach. Maybe it's just me, but was my take on it.
No, I don't think it's just you. I think most testers expect this, especially since tools like Puppeteer and Playwright, which are probably the closest alternative to xk6-browser, are both sort of promise based, right? And I think part of the reason that xk6-browser isn't there yet is because in K6 Core they just released support for async, and I think technically the support is there, like the APIs are there and everything, but nothing is really using it yet. And now xk6-browser has to be changed to use that. I think it just came out in the latest version, 0.37, right? So definitely on the cards. And there are a whole lot of things that are going to be opened up by that. But yeah, unfortunately not available yet.
Yeah, and I just saw on a back channel there, somebody's ears were ringing, and they did mention that they just recently started moving to the async APIs now. So,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, coming
So
soon.
it's happening. Stop. So it was actually one of the developers of xk6-browser who said that. So that's his way of saying, like, Thomas, come on, stop complaining, man.
Give him a minute.
Yeah, it's happening, but it was just released in K6 Core as well. So, I think you also mentioned when you presented this internally that you also came across some bugs, not in xk6-browser, but in K6 Cloud, right?
Yeah, and I actually before this call, I got someone was asking me why I was blowing up the backend with strange errors again. Yeah, it seems like so I ran it locally now, and what I want to do, or what we want to do, is run it. What I thought I wanted it to do was to run it in the cloud and see it in the beautiful cloud app, right? But it looked a bit weird, and the data that the aggregation sent to the front end was also a bit strange. I mean, we had some checks. One was failing, a couple of ones was passing, but they didn't show up, and the dates were a bit wonky and stuff like that. But apparently, there's something strange going on the back end when you do a local execution on at least my code. So, but they're looking
It's
into it. So,
also it's also a special setup for now, right? Because for most people, you can't, without any setup on our end as well, you can't compile a custom binary for K6 and run that in K6 Cloud. You'd have to contact support, and I'm not entirely sure about the specifics of like whether that'll cost more, but if you do want to, it is possible. Contact support at k6.io.
yeah, but so to be clear, I'm just using it as a normal user at this point. So I'm just doing a local execution and sending the output to the cloud. So I'm not running.
Oh, I see. Not
K6
running
in
it on the cloud.
No,
Sending the output to the cloud.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense if it's not something that's publicly available yet, then we're also not really, we haven't really tested the output to cloud yet.
True. So that's why I have the local run.
I believe this is our CTO saying, front-end team finding bugs in back-end code. Samuel, whom we've had on office hours as well, will say it's a front-end bug. Yeah. I think that you also mentioned that there was an ingest problem.
Yeah, I think this is the ingest problem that we're talking about.
Oh, okay. It's the same one.
Yeah, it's definitely backend.
And then you also mentioned something in the internal tech talk that in the page for forgetting, once you forget a password, there's a little thing there at the bottom that says, already have an account, sign up here. And your point was, why do we have that on the forgot password page? Because obviously you have an account.
Yeah, because I was looking at the whole page to see what I wanted to test or make testable, and it just felt wrong. So yeah, I would raise my hand for changing that to something else.
Question from Mark here. You could combine a mix of protocol level load generation plus the front end performance sampling into the same scenario. Yes, not a scenario I would recommend that in the testing sense, yes, the same scenario, but in the K6 terminology, I'd probably include them as separate scenarios, just so you can also control them separately. But yes, you absolutely can. The whole benefit of xk6-browser being part of K6 is that you can use all of the same checks, thresholds, metrics, any of the like output formats for results are going to work for the xk6-browser metrics too, because those are just other metrics, and also all the stages and like executors and scenario stuff are going to work too. So
Looks like
about the
I was
yeah,
going to
go
say
on.
it looks like there's more shade being thrown on the back end developers. So ouch.
That's okay. When the back end people were here, and we've had a few on as well, right? They were always like, it's always a front end issue.
It's either that or DNS.
Yeah. Mark says, awesome. So running 1,000 transactions per second on the back end together with sampling full front end impacts of that load. Yeah, it's the best way to go, because I know Mark knows, but just for everybody, front end testing usually is way more resource intensive, and so the best approach is to generate most of the load with a protocol based tool, or on the protocol level, and then just supplement that with a sampling of users on the front end, just so because it's still going to be the same, right? It's the same amount of load. It's just that you're only collecting those front end metrics on a handful of users. So way more efficient, cost efficient, and resource efficient to combine the two. And it's just the same tool, K6. So so you've mentioned a few things that you thought were a bit wonky about xk6-browser.
Yeah.
We should probably say xk6-browser is still in beta. There's a reason it's an extension and not part of K6 core. And the beta part goes for both the documentation and the functionality. So like definitely try it out first. It's not where we want it to be yet, but it's still pretty new.
Yeah, I could add to that because I didn't have to use xk6-browser. So even though the wonkiness, it's mainly lack of documentation and the race conditions thingy, but I didn't have to use xk6-browser, but I decided to use it either way because obviously it's awesome.
Mark says,
volunteered.
you could simulate latency and network constraints on the front end sampling instances also. Followed up with, how does my website work on a really crappy Wi-Fi at the hotel? Yes, and you can even add to that, because I have a few videos on K6 on the YouTube channel about how to incorporate chaos engineering as well. So you could have one scenario that's protocol based, one scenario that's, xk6 browser based, and then another one that's chaos, whether that's terminating Kubernetes pods, for example, or simulating some sort of black hole attack or you could be dropping packets, or you can do all sorts of things. Each of them can be individually determined, so you can only do the chaos things, the experiment, like 30 minutes into the test or something. You also mentioned, we already talked about the sync versus async. Async support is coming soon, literally now being worked on. And the same developer now, I don't know if he wants to be named, but he says that docs are also coming very soon, TM. We're probably just being a little a little premature. But also, what about the helper functions? I was wondering, we already have JSLib for K6. I wonder if it would be worthwhile to have a JSLib for xk6 browser.
Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't say that my helpers that I did are something that everyone want to use. Some might find it more in line what they want to do if they just use the selectors in line while they write the test. I felt that it was a nice way to just gather all the info in one place. Also be able to look at the code and see what I will be looking on later on. So for me, I don't know even if everyone in the team would like to use them. So we'll see. But yeah, if the community or we ourselves find that we could add just helpers or utils, we should definitely add them to the JS lib, I think, because it would help people get started at least.
What do you think, Paul?
About the additional JS lib? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I would think so. I mean, a lot of that stuff is going to be a little bit more specific for that type of front end test. But yeah, I mean, you know, maybe not everybody will prefer your particular brand of dog food, but you know, hey, it's a starting point.
Yeah. And when we start thinking about like your experience in general, it seems like it's overall been positive. But I was also taking notes on best practices for browser testing in general that you already mentioned. And one is last week while I was away, Paul and Leandro were talking about performance driven development. And it's also been called out by Fernando, Federico, somebody else, but Fernando Kobayashi was also talking about how this is the beauty of getting devs to write the tests. And one of the things that you did was to change the app code itself to make it testable. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's basically because you could write any test you want with just looking at the dev tools and finding that component. But I guess when the test suite grows, you don't want tests to randomly fail because of reasons that are libraries or packages that you install. That doesn't actually change how the page behave. So it's worth thinking about or investing in the future, because it's never fun to just sit and patch, test, or even code because you change the package. Just makes it more reliable that you actually look for what you want to look at and not just looking in the haystack. You could actually maybe pull out the magnet and find the needle faster, right? So it's definitely worth adding stuff to be able to find them better for testing, even if it's only for testing.
Magnets. Can you explain how those work?
It has a red side
How do
and
they
a blue
work?
side.
It's just like, I don't know.
Yeah. But also it's also not just a matter of having them, it's also like not changing them unless it's necessary. I mean, obviously sometimes it is necessary, but I think it's good practice not to change class names just like for no good reason.
Yeah. The problem here is in our case, and in many that use React and like compiled JavaScript spas and stuff like that, is that they might not have full control over the class names. We don't. We have some control, but it's not one-to-one. And you have the hashes and stuff like that.
Mm.
But yeah, if you can control the class names and they're unique, fine, use them. That's a unique identifier in my eyes. In our case, it's not reliable enough to write a lot of tests and hope that it works.
This is also one of those situations when, as a tester, it's nice to have access to the application code. When you can change it if you really need to, but even if you're not the one changing it, because normally I would still, as a tester, talk to the developer before changing anything. But it's also nice to see what the behavior is, because sometimes just by looking by inspecting the element in DevTools, it's hard to tell the rhyme and reason behind the behind the class names.
Generated,
You know,
yeah.
how exactly is it being generated?
Yeah, especially if you break away from BEM and stuff like that, when the actual person with some knowledge on what it should be just names the classes the right way, and you have a code style that you follow, then it's easier to think about what they should be and what they are. But in our case, it's like just happens to be stuff. If you would want to, we don't think about the class names in that way because we use them in code only. We don't use the produced class names that you would see in the DOM. So we could think about class names, but still not in a reliable way, because that's not how the app is quite big, so we couldn't start just using class names now for testing. We would need something else to identify stuff with.
No. Is Mark throwing insane clown posse videos at us here?
Yeah, he's actually showing you how magnets work.
And the magnets,
Paul.
yeah.
Also, I wanted to ask you what you think about the screenshots.
Yeah, I love them. I have so many. I have big plans for the screenshots. I've been looking around. I found some libraries that could do the stuff I want-ish. It would be nice to have something that is not pixel to pixel perfect, but something that you could use to actually compare snapshots, that like you do with the codes in unit tests sometimes. Just to see what has changed. You could the package I found, you could actually just, if you take the whole screenshot, you could just look at the footer region and just look at that if you wanted to. And yeah, I have big plans for that. Just a safety net, or at least a diff.
Yeah, I think screenshots have become more and more important. I used to think that they weren't necessary and they just took up more space than, more storage than really you would need them for. But I think that there are a lot of applications now that have like client side JavaScripts or whatever that are firing that won't necessarily show up in like if you just grab the HTML of the response body that was returned, it might not show up there. And kind of like what you showed in that screenshot where it was the right page, you had definitely logged in, but the animations hadn't quite finished. And I know you also said in the internal talk, sometimes it's not enough to check for the element. It's also important to check for the state or the content of the element.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes the selectors I guess you could use a simple selector and then you actually use some code to actually do some validation on the context. But yeah, unique identifiers are better, or knowing when the animation stops. Yeah.
Now I know on oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just about to say snapshots. I think it's the way. It's the easy way at least.
Did you know that there are also plans to do videos?
No, I didn't. But I guess it would be nice if you're reporting to someone, I guess. Yeah, but yeah, anything that you could show someone, especially a non-developer, I guess, I think is a great deal. And also to be able to, it failed, let's look at the whole, like full story does and stuff like that. You actually see what happened, what went wrong.
Yeah, I know as useful as screenshots are sometimes in my own tests, you get the screenshot just before something happens and you're thinking, oh,
Right.
if it had just waited a second, I would know exactly what had happened,
Yeah.
and I guess that's when a video would be really useful if instead of a single snapshot, you got, 2 seconds before, 2 seconds after kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
would be
viewing
amazing.
that transition would be a big deal.
Oh, that's interesting, Marta. She's talking about a GIF recorder. I don't think that that's in the works. I don't believe, off the top of my head, I might be wrong, but I don't think Playwright has that. I think they also just have video and snapshots, and we're trying to get feature parity with Playwright at least before we introduce something completely new. But I think videos would serve for this use case. Another thing that you mentioned is that you haven't automated everything. I know that internally we were all like, "Oh, what about the test builder? Why didn't you script for the test builder?" Maybe that has to do with the fact that you are the developer working on test builder changes.
Yeah, exactly. So that would have been a waste of time. So one of the xk6-browser developers has actually tested out making a script with xk6-browser for the test builder. So I could just copy that script and I know it will work because he has made it and I've run it and it works. So it wouldn't prove anything for me, because when I did this, it was all about experience, can we use it and stuff like that. And also big changes to the test builder that I was working on simultaneous to this. So yeah.
Can you tell us what those changes are?
You tell me, are they, is it okay to tell everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
No.
so, yeah.
It shouldn't be a secret. So we introduced scenarios to the test builder recently, and we're introducing script scenarios in cooperation with actually test builder scenarios. So you could drag and drop stuff or import HAR files, and you could also add additional scenarios to that, let's say, test builder tests that are actually written in pure JavaScript. And you would have access to, you would be able to import all the JSLib packages and also the core packages. So you would get to write some script in JavaScript, or basically you could do everything in JavaScript in test builder, but I would just use the script editor in that case. But it would make sense to use it for creating the options, I would say. Even if you're an advanced user, it's pretty simple to just use a slider and enter some numbers and just copy the script.
That's really cool. So if anybody wants that and doesn't see it on K6 Cloud soon, it's because of Thomas.
Yeah.
And his email address is...
And his mobile number is...
The email address was on screen recently. So.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. It's really awesome to have you dog fooding two products at once. So it's kind of like Inception dog fooding, really. Yeah. Mutual dog fooding. But it was also nice to have you on office hours.
Yeah, it was nice.
So thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Next week, we will have Tom Missour from Professional Services to talk about another form of dog fooding, except he's going to come in with the API version of what Thomas was doing. So more dog fooding with K6 of K6 soon. I guess that's it for me. Paul, you want to say anything else?
I got nothing. I think we hit it. I'm glad.
Right.
I'm glad people came by again. That Leandro and I didn't ruin it for them last week. So.
No, of course not. Just the opposite. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you for watching. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.